This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. This week, I'm joined by author Stephen Rutt to talk about all things water, wetlands, and the landscapes we so often overlook. From chalk streams to peat bogs, we explore the strange, vital journey of water through our environment and why it deserves far more of our attention.
So water has kind of just forever been a part of my life, which now that I say it, sounds like a really dumb thing to say because water is life. But I grew up as a birdwatcher in Suffolk from the age of 14. And so every spare weekend was spent by salt marsh or by fenland. I learned my waders, I learned my ducks. Wetland birds sort of, are birds for me. And reed beds are just tremendously evocative places that I love, and I'm incapable of walking past a reed without taking a picture of it. Before that, I was a fisherman, and I used to, spend a lot of time dangling sweet corn into sort of dismal khaki-coloured ponds in pursuit of fish that my brother had a knack of catching, and I did not. And before then, on my mum's birthday when I was 2, I fell into the River Cam. So water's always been, that's actually one of my oldest memories, is sort of that sensation of being plunged into cold water suddenly. So yeah, water's always been kind of the backdrop to my life, and it's been kind of the focus of all of my interests. I am above all a naturalist and a bird watcher, and I just like being outside. And if I'm near a wetlands, then even better. I love wetlands. So that's how the idea to write a book about wetlands first came to me, was because of they've always been sort of present in my life. And I'm not a swimmer, so I thought that water is a topic that its time is coming. And I thought I could give a different perspective on it to the wild swimming books that you can read nowadays.
I love that. I love that you're absolutely obsessed with water and you don't swim. It just is brilliant. It's such an irony. You talking there reminded me, I did actually topple backwards into the River Wandle when I was quite small. And I remember being immensely proud of it. Like I walked home and I was telling everyone who I met, that I was soaking wet and why I was soaking wet. But conversely to you, I can swim, and I know it sounds bizarre, but water doesn't register for me like a landscape does. And I wondered when I was reading your book, and this might just be, again, my totally personal perspective on things, but does water kind of suffer from a bit of a PR crisis? Is it not as popular a topic as some other things, do you think?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I think it probably does. I think because we've grown up, certainly growing up in the south of England, water is a bit manky. The rivers are a bit disgusting. So, for example, the River Lark is the river in the local town that I grew up in, and it's a chalk stream. So it's an example of England's great contribution to the world's water. These are really unique types of rivers that you only find in the southeast of England and northern France. And I knew it as basically a concrete ditch running through my local Tesco car park. That's kind of astonishing that, we've taken what should be, pristine and full of life and funneled it through a car park in concrete, with no sort of respect for it. We don't have any great sort of expectation that it should be pure and natural, because we have 200 years of sort of industrial abuse of our waters. And I appreciate that the further north and I guess west as well that you go within Britain, that kind of changes. But yeah, certainly in the south of England and parts of the industrial north as well, we've just had no respect for our waters. When I was a fisherman, it was like, don't go in the water, you catch Files disease, which is bacteria passed in by rat urine. So yeah, they're kind of a health issue in a way, a lot of our waters. Or they get presented to you that way when you're a child, and you might fall into them.
You mentioned the southern thing because I think the Wandle that I mentioned has been strangled and pushed underground and is basically like a trickle of its former self. And there's a fictional author, I think it's Ben Aranovich, I'm probably pronouncing that completely wrong, who writes about the sort of London rivers particularly. So maybe if you are from that area, then you've just seen them dwindle to nothing, or you just see them as a kind of, like you say, a bit of a manky stream really that goes past. And it's not until you get out into the wider landscape that they become more noticeable. But the other thing that I think is that a lot of people just don't really understand how they work. So I was reading your book, and even trying to get my head around. So I'm not giving too much away here, but you're following a droplet from, the various different routes it might take. And even still, my brain's going, oh, hang on a minute, I've got to do a few leaps here to put the pieces together to kind of track how this works. Because for me, it's quite an alien landscape. I can't really make sense of it. And I think that's why people maybe don't acknowledge it, don't protect it as much as they might other things.
Yeah, because water is massive. It's everywhere. It's kind of fundamental, but also it gets in our way. How many times do you go outside and you've got the wrong coat and it starts raining and you're really annoyed? How many times do you go for a picnic and it rains on you? How many times are you sort of trying to watch Wimbledon or Test cricket and, rain stops play? It's that kind of thing. And so with the whole idea of following a raindrop from source to sea, I wanted to basically retell the water cycle, which, is the really basic stuff of like primary school science lessons. And I wanted to really foreground its journey so that the reader knows exactly what's happening and why, and kind of put the complexity back into it, how water engages with the landscape and sort of the life that it kindles. And also, what we've done to it and how we've tried in the past to destroy that life, and how we might go about bringing some of it back.
Well, again, just to state the bleeding obvious, it's so fluid. Again, in your book, you talk about it. It will ebb and flow. It will pop up in places. And anyone who's had a house or a garden will think to themselves, actually, the one thing really you cannot control, and the one thing where you pray it doesn't happen, is water coming in where you don't want it to, because it's such a difficult thing to control. And again, I think that you reflect on that really well on the book, how waterscapes are so changeable and so driven by many different factors.
Yeah, particularly in the south and east of England, if you're on chalk is permeable, the water will do what it wants. And so you can try and move a chalk stream, but it's still going to percolate up where it wants to go. So yeah, basically you can't manage water by kind of brute strength. It follows its own logic of gravity and what the soil's like, what the ground is like. We shouldn't be trying to manage water at all. We should be trying to manage ourselves around water to let it go where it wants. So, for example, in Dumfries, we have an issue with where the town centre floods every year, or every winter. And it's because back in the 19th century, the bit of ground beside the river was concreted and turned into a sort of like marketplace. Absolutely fine. But in doing so, the bridge that used to span the river has gone from 9 arches to 6. So we've lost a third of the riverbank, or at least the riverbed, to a brick wall. And now we wonder why it floods every year.
And it's that trying to control it, I think I'm right in saying, that causes so many problems, isn't it? When you are trying to stop it going places, that's when you're disturbing how it acts as an organism. And that, I think, is when things go really horribly wrong.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So one of the things that struck me about your book is that I liked it because I'm like a real natural pessimist. But your book, I think, is much more of a kind of, this is how water should work than this is how water isn't working for us at the moment. Did you consciously not put too much of a pessimistic spin on it?
No. I don't try consciously to put too much of a spin on anything. I'm the sort of reader who doesn't want spin. I want stuff. I like tangible things rather than, argument. And so I was careful to pick out the things that did give me hope, because I was aware that otherwise it just could be really bleak. But that's not fake hope or anything like that. Certainly the 2024 general election, a lot of that was fought on the state of our rivers and the state of our sewers. And I couldn't remember another time. I mean, I know I'm only young, but I couldn't remember another time when a general election was fought on environmental grounds. So that gave me hope. That gave me genuine hope. And I would now like to see the government follow through on that hope. For that, I'm not sure how much hope I actually have. So it's kind of up to us just to keep reminding them that they said that.
So you do talk about some conservation projects actually that do give a lot of hope.
Oh yeah, so in Dumfries and Galloway, we love to refer to ourselves as the forgotten corner of Scotland because we're below the central belt, and everyone who comes up goes straight up the motorway through the middle and ignores us. And what that does give is a certain sort of latitude for projects that I don't think would happen elsewhere in the country. So over towards Castle Douglas, which is in the middle of Galloway, there's an amazing place called Freve Nature Reserve, which was an old dairy farm, and it's run by the National Trust for Scotland. And when the tenant farmer gave it up, instead of just assigning it to a new farmer, they decided to turn it into a re-wetted wooded wetland. So they've demolished 35 metres of riverbank, they've blocked in a load of ditches, and they've taken out all the fences. And so the cows that graze there now have those collars that keep them in certain fields at a certain time. And it's just rebounded with so much life. It's truly an amazing place to go and visit. And part of what's amazing is that the timescale they've given for that project is 100 years. So they're 6% of the way through the project, and it is already amazing. It's full of life. There's glyceria everywhere. There's grasshopper warblers singing, ospreys nesting. In winter, it's full of pink-eared geese, green and white-fronted geese, willow tits, water owls, and plants I've never seen anywhere else, like Marshall owl sport. It's just the most fantastic playground for me, just to go for a couple of hours and just like look at stuff. It's amazing.
You were talking, I think, about areas where they had re-established forest coverage, but actually that it seemed to be at the expense of the kind of wetlands. But again, that's such a thing, isn't it? Let's plant some more trees. But a lot of the time, that's not actually that appropriate for the site that we're on.
Oh, yeah. So I think you're thinking of the Galloway Forest, which basically now clads what used to be open moorland. Now, Sitka spruce and other pines kind of exacerbate pollution issues because their needles are really good at scavenging pollutants from the air, and then they just wash off and into the watercourses, which helps make a lot of the lochs in Galloway are overly acidified, and that's part of the reason for that. One of the things you always want to sort of bang on about when it comes to like conservation and the environment is the right tree in the right place is a good thing. The wrong tree in the wrong place is a bad thing. So whereas like deciduous trees will help clean the air and buffer pollutants and slow water progress down through the landscape, coniferous trees and forestry plantations are often having the opposite effect. So what looks natural in the Galloway Forest Park isn't.
And the deciduous trees are good for feeding the beavers.
Yeah, so beavers love willow. I mean, beavers, they're like the ultimate herbivore. They eat like Japanese knotweed and the water dropworts, which, profoundly toxic to us. They just munch their way through them.
Wow.
And yeah, they love willow as well. And as a gardener, you'll know the term for this because I can never remember it. You know, when you take a cutting for something and it'll grow from a cutting, willow will do that. And so what beavers are doing, if they detach a willow branch from the tree and it sort of slips into the water and flows downstream, that willow will root elsewhere.
So they're actively propagating plants and repopulating areas.
Yeah. And slowing the progress of water down, which is good. Yeah, beavers are amazing.
I can't remember the stat, but it was something like the water took between 2 and 4 hours to pass through one area where there wasn't beavers, and then 11 days where there was beavers.
Yeah. Slowing water down is really good for flood defences, because part of the reason why we have problems with floods is because there's nothing to hold the water there, so it just carries on through. So it was just explained to me like kind of like a motorway. If a river is a motorway and it's flowing downstream and then it meets a traffic jam, that water's got to go somewhere. Whereas if you have beaver dams in place, it's slowing the water down, so it's not all rushing to one place. So basically, it's kind of like effective traffic calming measures, but with water.
It put me in mind of, the whole kind of ethos behind the book, which is that there are this finite amount of water molecules and then they are just recirculating through the system. And then part of my rational brain goes, well, if there's only a finite amount, how are we having problems with flooding? And we can only ever have this much water in the system, and we're kind of complaining that everything's getting wetter. But I'm assuming it is just water in the wrong place, or water where it's not doing what it should be doing.
Yeah, so basically the system's getting more extreme. As the climate changes, we're putting more energy into the environment, which means that evaporation is increasing. And so like rainfall is becoming stronger in bursts. So we're getting wetter winters and drier summers. And heavy rainfall after a dry summer just leads to flash floods because there's nowhere for the water to go because the soil is parched, as I'm sure you know. And yeah, so water in its sort of deficit has been a major problem throughout society. So if you think back at the major gone civilization, so the Mesopotamians, the Indus Valley, these people have like really old archaeological evidence of like water storage and toilets and ditches and cisterns and things like that. But because they ran out of water, their civilizations collapsed.
Again, one of the problems, as it seems to me, is that water courses, wetlands, they cover huge areas. And then when you have land that's owned privately or even publicly, but you know, perhaps by different kind of organizations, institutions, you have this issue that the water has to operate as an entire organism, but there's so many different stakeholders involved that sometimes it's difficult to say this entire thing should be doing this when you've got one person saying, yeah, but I don't want it doing that on my land. And is that, do you think, one of the issues, just the fact there are so many people and so many moving parts?
Yes, but then I'm not sure how you solve that. And I'm very glad it's not my job to solve that.
It is tricky. You know, everybody's just trying to do their own thing. And some people have got good motivations and some people don't. And, you know, some people are trying to use their land for different ways. And yes, it's an incredibly tricky kind of problem. I agree.
Well, certainly one thing I found when I was researching the book is that if you go down sort of one avenue, if you pull at sort of one interesting thread in the topic of water, it just leads to so much other stuff. And an appreciation of that is kind of what we need as a society. So I know that planning permission for developments in Suffolk hasn't been granted because of the stress it would cause to the water supply in the county. I use Suffolk a lot as an example because I grew up there, and it's also genuinely pretty arid. I was back last August, and it was everything was brown. It looked like Nebraska. It was very weird. So one of the things when I was there is that I went to see the Lark and the other chalk stream, the River Linnet, and they were both completely dry. And that's astonishing and shocking, and it's the product of many, many decisions that gets you to that position. And yeah, often, the planning department, they have a role to play. They might not think they do, but they do.
But with that in mind, obviously, we do need to take individual responsibility on top of expecting other people to do it. And as I said before we sort of started the interview, most of the people listening are gardeners. And as I can see it, there's a few things that we should be doing as gardeners specifically to help conserve water and to make sure that we're doing our best by it. What might be your kind of top tips for gardeners?
I mean, okay, so I feel like a fraud because I'm not a gardener whatsoever. Having a pond, if you can, that is an amazing thing for bringing in insects. And I know nobody necessarily likes the idea of insects unless you're an amateur entomologist like I am, but insects run the world. So having a little pond in your garden is a great way to help your garden because insects are going to help your garden. And water storage, so get a water butt. And also, I think you've also got to be careful on what you plant. Make sure it's, suitable for the climate and, the amount of water you can give it as well. So it's not too thirsty. And what's her name? Beth Chatto?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I went to university in Essex and her gardens were right on the edge of town. And I think they are specifically planted with the sort of arid Essex climate in mind as well.
That raises a very, very important point, which is, do we need to be careful not to be planting things that are going to escape the garden and then pollute our waterways and cause them damage?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If you can avoid planting anything vaguely invasive, that's great. Rhododendron is my current bête noire. So I've been going up to the temperate rainforests of Galloway quite a bit recently. And all the nature reserves are lovely, but nature reserves are just a line on a map. And you go down the valley and suddenly the same woodland is absolutely choked out with rhododendron, which is, horrible stuff. I'm sure nobody's planting Japanese knotweed in their garden or Himalayan balsam. But yeah, the rivers are a great sort of network for nature to travel up and down.
Mm.
So I found an island on my local river last summer. It was absolutely covered in Japanese knotweed, and you can just see it sort of spreading up and down the river,
Yeah.
which is not good.
No.
But yeah, I think rhododendron is public enemy number one for me.
Yeah, again, I'm assuming this is countrywide, but certainly where I am, the riverbanks are just covered in Himalayan balsam where I am, and the woodlands are full of rhododendron. So, yeah.
On one level, Himalayan balsam it's a lovely looking plant and it feeds a lot of bees.
Mm.
But it is a disaster because it does completely choke out the bank. That's all you're going to get in that place. And because it's annual, when it dies back, it destabilizes the riverbank as well.
Ah, yes. Very good point.
Also, what you want for insects is like a balanced diet, which sounds, again, kind of crazy. But, insects want a nice variety of plants to be feeding off. And if all they've got is Himalayan balsam, all they've got is Himalayan balsam.
Mm.
It might look nice, but it's not nice.
It's not ideal, no. And the other thing that I'm guessing gardeners should do is not buy peat.
Yes, absolutely. So peat, and I'm never quite sure who knows how peat is formed, but essentially it's incomplete decay of plant life through waterlogged soil. So peat is wetter than milk. Peat is like 92% water, or should be 92% water. Yeah, so basically sphagnum moss has phenolic compounds which are acidic. And so when plant life in a bog dies, it gets pickled in that acidic water. There's not enough oxygen for it to decay, and it turns into peat. And because it's incomplete decay, it doesn't release its carbon to the atmosphere. So peat is really rich in carbon. And if bogs are kept wet, so if the peat is kept healthy, then that carbon stays locked up in the soil. And that's great. That's what we need in this, time of climate change. Yeah. So by using peat-based products in your garden, you are essentially, they work because of that carbon, because carbon is really useful for life, but you are also spreading and emitting carbon for using those products.
Mm.
So yeah, keep peat in the ground.
Absolutely.
The same also with salt marsh. I know no one's using salt marsh vegetation as compost or fertilizer in their garden, but I think, was it a square kilometre of salt marsh vegetation contains like 6 kilos of carbon? It's because of the same process, these plants dying but not decaying.
Yeah. I guess they're just locking it all up, aren't they? And I couldn't believe that, where you said about it containing less solid matter than milk. That's just mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's mad. But also, the flow country up in the far northeast of Scotland, which is a bog bigger than London, contains more carbon locked up than all of the country's woodland.
Yeah, again, that stat blew me away. I was like, that's just incredible. And yeah, I think now people are banging the drum a lot more and, hopefully paying attention. But yeah, for a long time, I think they just got completely overlooked and abused, really.
One of the things that I'm very good at is being very enthusiastic about places as well as species. Obviously I love my wildlife, but the flow country in the far northeast of Scotland is the most amazing place. It's now a UNESCO World Heritage Site for peat. It is a naturalist's playground. It's the size of London. You don't even need to walk over it. You just look by your feet and there's so much drama. The plants are amazing. Butterwort, sundew, lousewort, it's all fantastic stuff.
I have to say, there's a lot of places that you talk about in the book that I've now thought, I better put that on my list because they do sound excellent. So yes, you've done a very good job of marketing the wetlands. Out of interest, you referred to it, I think, from the off as wetlands, but you called the Waterlands. Is that a nod to Graham Swift?
Yeah, it's a nod to Graham Swift because his book, Waterland, is one of my favourite novels of all time. And I came back to it during lockdown and I found that the bookmark I'd been using was a train ticket from 2013 when I was commuting into my job in London and not really enjoying my life, finding it very stressful and feeling removed from East Anglia. And here was this novel of the Fens and Fenland history, and made up Fenland history as well. But it was so resonant to me at the time. And also because 2 reasons. Wetlands are weirdly very specific. So things like rivers don't really count, but you can't talk about water in this country and ignore rivers. And also they're defined by plants, wetlands really. when I started this book, I was absolutely not a botanist. And then kind of by the end of this book, I was like, oh dear, I've accidentally become a botanist. So I called it the Waterlands just for being a bit looser than the strict category.
Yeah, the terminology again blew my mind, I have to say. So hats off to you for getting your head around that. And just my final question is, you clearly are very passionate about lots of different aspects of nature. And I'm always champing at the bit for the next thing. Have you thought about what you might consider writing about next?
Yeah, I would like to write about bats.
Oh,
I've already done one bat project recently, which was a bat podcast called Echoes and Whispers. It's available on my website. And that was a lot of fun. And one of the things I like about bats is that logistically they're very useful because you do the field work at night and then you can write it up in the day. That's quite useful. So yeah, I'd like to write about bats.
excellent. Well, if you write about bats, I'll be first in line to get the book because I love bats.
So yeah, this is from the beginning of my chalkstream chapter. It's called Green as a Dream. And I wrote this in my lunch break at work. So this is 45 minutes work for me. In the chalkstream of the mind, it is always a languid late spring afternoon. The sun always shining on a water that flows, cool and clear. They are rivers, but note the slippage in terminology. Diminished to stream, a suggestion of their smaller size, their lower energy, their dreamlike state. Note also the chalk, for it is the rock beneath that the water is stored in, purified by and pushed through, that makes the chalk streams of England and northern France unique. It is this, their particular combination of water and land, that makes them special, that makes them seem like the wind in the willows come to life. Chalk streams don't carve their route. These are not places of a vulgar energy, but of gentleness. The water seeking out the lowest point in the landscape, and then ushering itself down, gliding between lush banks, lined with the feathery-leaved willows that flicker between green and grey and green with the drifting of the breeze. The drooping branches sway above the flowering white froth that waxes and wanes with the passing months. First cow parsley, then hogweed, then lesser water parsnip, each flower covered with insects, seeking out the pure sugar at their heart. Below in the flow, emerald weeds drift sinuously in the current. Water crowfoot blooms clear of the surface with a white buttercup-type flower, like a lily in miniature. Below the weeds, white-clawed crayfish scuttle like small squat lobsters over the gravel bottom, from hiding place to hiding place, grabbing at anything edible. It might be fish eggs or decaying plant matter. It might be invertebrate larvae as they begin to feel a stirring within, responding to time and temperature and moving towards the banks, where they crawl up the vegetation, clinging to safety above the water's surface. Then they split their own skeletal skins open, squeezing out their new soft bodies as wings unfurl and harden rapidly in the sunlight. As sulphur yellow mayflies and dusky brown caddisflies emerge, they turn the water into a rippling carnival, the surface ringed with the movements of trout, sucking down the flies that don't make it out of the stream's surface. White-legged damselflies drift close to the banks, seeking out the small insects that escaped the water's surface. Scarce chaser dragonflies shoot high over the flow, never seeming to land, restlessly seeking out the bigger insects to eat in the short summer blaze of their life on the wing. As they hunt overhead, salmon seeking sex have followed their noses back from the sea to the gravel bed they were born in, to begin their cycle again, as a milked fertilized egg, wedged in the gravel, washed by the river's flow. One cycle in the flow of a larger cycle. The water's constant movement from deep underground to the sea and the air above and the flowers beside. They compel you to think of them this way, as rivers of life, pristine waterlands, the earth emanating its cleaned and polished plasma. Because these are rivers that just have something about them, some magic that others do not. As Rupert Brooke wrote about one, the stream mysterious glides beneath, green as a dream and deep as death. But to describe the chalk stream from the ideal, is like describing southern England as an Eden. Most of our chalk streams have fallen, still green but no longer deep as death, now shallow and gasping for breath.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to Stephen for a great conversation. If today's episode has got you thinking more deeply about how water moves through our environment, you might also enjoy episode 352, Peat, Politics and Horticulture, and episode 322, Garden Wildlife Ponds. You'll find links to both in the show notes, and as always, thank you for listening. Next up is Benny with his Insect of the Week. But first, here's a word from our sponsors, The Roasting House. Please do go and check out their website and support them if you can.
There's nothing like a nice cup of coffee outside on a spring day. Hello from the Roasting House. We're a small, family-owned coffee roastery based in South Yorkshire. We love coffee, but we're also passionate about protecting nature and trying to keep our footprint as small as we can. At the Roasting House, we offer delicious coffees from around the world, carefully selected from farms that use nature-friendly methods such as shade growing, soil conservation, and maintaining wild areas for native wildlife. We roast in small batches using an energy-efficient roaster and filter the smoke to remove carbon to reduce air pollution. Roasting House coffee is packed in home compostable packaging, and we know that it actually breaks down because we've tested it in our own compost heap and worm farm. Order at roastinghouse.co.uk, and if you mention Roots and All or the Insect of the Week at checkout, we'll send you 25% extra free coffee as a thank you for supporting us.
The yellow-legged mining bee. Scientific name, Andrena flavipes. I'm really excited to be able to feature a mining bee today. It's one of my favourite insect groups across the whole world. And mining bees are ground nesting bees. Ground nesting bees are not all mining bees. There's all sorts of iterations of the ground nesting behaviour. But in the world, there's roughly 21,000 species of bee, just under, but there's more being discovered. And approximately 70% of the world's bees nest in the ground. They're ground nesting. So that always is in the back of my mind. That's something I tell people constantly. It kind of shapes the way I garden. It shapes the way I live my life, and it shapes the way I observe wildlife, because there's so much going on the ground, and what we do to it has a huge impact on our wild insects, whether it's laying hard landscaping, whether it's mulching, whether it's digging gently or more severely. All these things can have an impact, some of them positive, some of them negative. So mining bees has been a massive group for me to shape my gardening and my learning, really. So the UK has a nice diversity, and Ireland, UK and Ireland, not all species are present in Ireland and not all species are present up north. So the Andrena genus, Andrena is around 67 species in the UK and Ireland. It's a wonderful genus, some really distinct bees, some very tricky to identify bees. The Andrena genus itself comes from ancient Greek, as far as I can tell. So it's anthrene or anthrene, which means wild bee or wasp. Bees evolved from wasps. That's a conversation for another day, but that's the genus. The epithet, the descriptor, the second word, flavipes or flavipes, is yellow or golden footed. So that relates to the leg, so the yellow-legged mining bee. And if you see the females in particular, the hind leg, the back leg, is very distinct. That's the leg that she collects pollen on. The pollen collecting hairs are yellowy, orange, golden coloured. But just a word of caution, when these bees start to fade and bleach and bald, it becomes harder and harder to identify. You do still learn how to identify plenty of the species as time goes through the season, but this one has also got very distinct bands on the abdomen. They're kind of really clear, strong bands, also kind of yellowy, orange, golden colour. And there are some doppelgangers, of course, especially with the Andrena genus. There's lots of very similar species. Andrena flavipes can be confused with a very scarce species called Andrena gravida or gravida, which is paler on the bands, but it's much rarer. So it's only found in the kind of Kent, Thames Gateway, maybe a bit of Sussex as well. So it's always good to get really clear photos if you can. This species is much more common It's a southern UK bee, this one. So it's not currently on the map in the Midlands and Scotland or Ireland. So if you do find it, that would be really cool, because then you might have the first records of your area. And habitat-wise, soft cliff, just seen it on coastal soft cliff this weekend myself. And kind of sunny, imperfect lawns, which is always the one that's very cool to show people in your garden, where the dog or the kids or your mowing has scalped or made some imperfect bare patches. If it's sunny enough and the soil conditions kind of fairly free draining, then there's a good chance you'll get species like this nesting there. And brownfield sites, similar, mimicking this kind of mixture of habitat as well. So they are in a reasonably wide range of habitat. Flower-wise, because they've got 2 generations, there's the initial spring generation that will be using kind of flowering shrubs like gorse, but also composites like dandelions and the asteraceae, any hawkweeds that are out, or sow thistles. And then you've got the second generation in summer, which will be using brambles and composites and also legumes, so summer flowering legumes. So it's a really cool, fairly tough and adaptable species, but it won't necessarily use any garden plant. So it still loves those wild plants. Also umbellifers and crucifers, really important for it too. So it's a fantastic bee. You have to kind of firstly work out how you can identify a honeybee to rule that out, because they can be quite easily confused there when people are getting into it. And then you need to be able to hone in on this one. I think it's quite a good one to learn. I think if you look up some pictures, the males are much more difficult to identify, but they're also quite distinct. I think it's a really good Andrena mining bee to learn right now, because it's on the wing now. And if you get your eye on this one, it's got 2 generations, so it's around for a few months. And as I always say, please record on the apps, iRecord and iNaturalist, because these records are absolutely valuable. And I really hope you see one at the minute.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.